The briefing room fell silent when she walked in. 6 feet of lethal precision wrapped in standard-issue fatigues, Lieutenant Sarah Night Angel Chen moved like smoke through the assembled Special Forces team. Her Asian features were sharp and unreadable, dark eyes scanning the room with the predatory focus of a hunter. The other operators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their skepticism. Colonel Marcus Rivera cleared his throat from behind the podium, his weathered face betraying nothing as he gestured toward the newcomer. "Gentlemen, meet your new team member. Lieutenant Chen will be handling reconnaissance and extraction for Operation Silent Storm." A low murmur rippled through the room. Staff Sergeant Tommy Bulldozer Martinez, a mountain of muscle and attitude, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Night Angel, huh? That's quite the call sign for someone who looks like she weighs maybe 120 pounds soaking wet." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. She took her seat without a word, ignoring the snickers from around the table. "Care to tell us how you earned that name, sweetheart?" This came from Captain Jake Reaper Morrison, the team's demolitions expert. His tone was casual, but the challenge was clear. Colonel Rivera's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Lieutenant Chen's credentials speak for themselves. She's graduated top of her class from every specialized training program the military offers. Sniper school, urban warfare, psychological operations, and several classifications I can't discuss in this room." "But Night Angel?" pressed Sergeant First Class Miguel Ghost Santos, the team's communications specialist. "Sounds like something out of a video game. What's next? Are we going to start calling ourselves the Power Rangers?" For the first time, Sarah spoke. Her voice was quiet, controlled, with just a hint of an accent that suggested she'd grown up speaking multiple languages. "The name was given to me by insurgents in Afghanistan. They said I moved through their compounds like death itself, appearing and disappearing without sound or trace. They started calling me Malak al-Lail, the Night Angel. My commanding officer thought it fit." "So you can sneak around in the dark," Martinez said with a dismissive wave. "Big deal. We all can." Sarah's lips curved in what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Perhaps we should focus on the mission briefing, Colonel." Rivera nodded, clicking to the first slide of his presentation. The screen filled with satellite imagery of a compound nestled in the mountains of Eastern Europe. "Operation Silent Storm targets a high-value asset. Viktor Kozlov, former Russian Spetsnaz-turned-arms dealer. Intelligence suggests he's brokering a deal to sell military-grade chemical weapons to terrorist cells across 3 continents." The room sobered instantly. Chemical weapons were no joke, and everyone present had seen the aftermath of their use in Syria and other conflict zones. "The compound is a fortress," Rivera continued, advancing to the next slide. "Concrete walls, armed guards, electronic surveillance, and motion sensors covering every approach. Traditional assault would result in high casualties and likely give Kozlov time to destroy evidence or escape through underground tunnels." "So what's the play?" asked Reaper, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional focus. "We insert by helicopter at 0200 hours, 15 clicks from the target. The team establishes a perimeter while Lieutenant Chen conducts reconnaissance and identifies the optimal entry point. Once she's gathered intelligence on guard rotations and security protocols, we move in for a coordinated strike." Ghost frowned at the tactical display. "That compound is lit up like a Christmas tree. Thermal imaging, night vision, pressure plates. How exactly is anyone supposed to get close enough for recon without triggering every alarm they've got?" Rivera's eyes found Sarah. "That's why Lieutenant Chen is here. Her methods are unconventional." Martinez let out a bark of laughter. "What's she gonna do? Ask them nicely to turn off their security systems?" Sarah stood smoothly from her chair, the movement so fluid it seemed almost choreographed. "Colonel, with your permission, I'd like to demonstrate." Rivera checked his watch. The training facility is closed for maintenance. I don't need the facility. Sarah's dark eyes swept the room, settling on Martinez. Sergeant, you mentioned my weight. Would you care to make a small wager? Martinez's chest puffed out with amusement. What kind of wager? Princess, I'll give you a 5-minute head start to hide anywhere in this building. If you can stay hidden for 10 minutes after I begin looking, I'll buy drinks for the entire team and request a transfer to a different unit. And if you find me, then you'll stop questioning my qualifications and start treating me like the soldier I am. The room erupted in low whistles and chuckles. Martinez looked around at his teammates, grinning broadly. You're on, Night Angel. But when I win, you're buying top-shelf whiskey, not beer. Colonel Rivera started to object, but Sarah held up a hand. This is important, sir. The team needs to trust each other completely for this mission to succeed. After a moment's hesitation, Rivera nodded. Very well, but keep it professional, and no damage to government property. Martinez stood up, cracking his knuckles. 5 minutes, you said? Starting now. Sarah consulted her watch as the big sergeant headed for the door. The moment Martinez disappeared, the remaining team members clustered around Sarah with renewed interest. Even Rivera seemed curious about what she had planned. You realize this building has 6 floors, basement levels, maintenance areas, and about 300 rooms? Ghost said. Martinez knows this place like the back of his hand. Plus, he's got 40 pounds on you and 10 years of experience playing hide-and-seek with bad guys, added Reaper. You sure about this? Sarah didn't answer. She was studying the building schematics on her phone, occasionally glancing at the air conditioning vents near the ceiling. Her breathing had become slower, more controlled. And something about her posture had changed. Where before she'd seemed coiled and alert, now she appeared almost meditative. Time, she announced after exactly 5 minutes. Without another word, she walked to the door and stepped into the hallway. The others followed at a distance, watching as she stood perfectly still in the corridor, head tilted slightly, as if listening for something only she could hear. The building was an aging government structure, all harsh fluorescent lighting and institutional beige walls. During the day, it bustled with activity, but at this hour it was nearly empty, just the occasional security guard making rounds and the hum of various electronic systems. Sarah closed her eyes. For 30 seconds, she didn't move. Then, without opening her eyes, she turned left and walked down the hallway with purposeful strides. Her footsteps made no sound on the polished floor, not the soft whisper of careful movement, but absolutely no sound at all, as if her boots never quite made contact with the ground. "How is she doing that?" whispered Ghost, but Rivera motioned for silence. They followed her through a maze of corridors, watching in growing amazement as she navigated the building without hesitation. She never paused at intersections, never checked room numbers or consulted a map. At one point, she stopped at what appeared to be a blank section of wall, pressed her ear against it for a moment, then continued on. 15 minutes later, they found themselves in the building's sub-basement, standing before a massive HVAC unit that serviced the entire structure. Sarah approached a maintenance panel and knelt down, pressing her palm against the metal housing. "He's in there," she said quietly, "behind the unit, where the return air ductwork creates a blind spot from the security cameras." Rivera and the others exchanged incredulous looks. The sub-basement wasn't even on the public building plans. It was restricted access only, known to a handful of maintenance personnel and senior staff. "Martinez?" Rivera called out. "You can come out now." Silence. Sarah stood and walked around to the back of the HVAC unit. "Sergeant Martinez, the demonstration is over." A full minute passed before they heard a rustling sound, followed by creative cursing in both English and Spanish. Martinez emerged from behind the machinery, his uniform dusty and his face showing a mixture of bewilderment and grudging respect. How? Was all he managed to say. Sarah dusted off her hands. You have a distinctive aftershave, Sergeant. Old Spice classic. It lingered in the stairwells where you'd passed. Your breathing pattern is deeper than most people's due to your size and fitness level. I could track the displacement of air in the ventilation system. And you favor your left ankle when you walk. Probably an old injury. The wear pattern on the floor tiles told me which direction you'd gone at each intersection. But how did you know about this room? It's not on any of the standard building layouts. The building's air handling system creates a distinctive resonance pattern. I mapped the ductwork by listening to air movement, which led me to conclude there had to be additional space down here to house the main units. Ghost shook his head slowly. That's impossible. Nobody can track someone through a building just by smell and sound. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a glimmer of something that might have been amusement. I spent 3 years training with indigenous trackers in Alaska, Montana, and the Australian outback. Then 6 months with urban specialists in Tokyo, learning to navigate by sound in environments with heavy electronic interference. The human senses are capable of far more than most people realize if properly developed. The Night Angel thing is starting to make sense, Reaper admitted grudgingly. Martinez extended his hand to Sarah. I owe you an apology, Lieutenant, and apparently a drink. She shook his hand firmly. Just your respect, Sergeant. The drinks can wait until after we complete the mission. As they made their way back upstairs, Rivera found himself walking beside Sarah. How long did it really take you to find him? About 3 minutes. I spent the rest of the time checking the building's security vulnerabilities and emergency exits. Old habits. Rivera nodded thoughtfully. And the Kozlov compound? Will be more challenging, but not impossible. Electronic sensors have patterns and blind spots. Guards have routines and fatigue cycles. Every fortress has weaknesses. You just need to know how to find them. Back in the briefing room, the atmosphere had completely changed. The team members who'd been skeptical an hour earlier now hung on Sarah's every word as she reviewed the compound's layout and pointed out potential entry routes. The eastern approach looks promising, she said, indicating a section of the perimeter wall. The thermal imaging system has a 15-second reset cycle every 3 minutes. The motion sensors are calibrated for objects moving faster than 2 miles per hour. Slow enough, and they'll register you as environmental noise. And the guards? Asked Ghost. Human behavioral patterns are predictable. Guards on night duty tend to cluster near heat sources and light. They'll focus on areas they can see clearly and avoid sections that make them feel exposed or isolated. Martinez leaned forward. You're talking about crawling through a war zone in complete darkness, avoiding cameras, sensors, and armed guards just to get close enough to peek through a window. Not peek, Sarah corrected. Infiltrate, gather intelligence on Kozlov's location, security protocols, and the chemical weapons storage. Map the interior layout and identify the best extraction routes for when the team moves in. Solo? Reaper's voice carried a note of concern. It's what I do. Colonel Rivera stood up. Deployment is in 18 hours. Use that time to familiarize yourselves with the equipment manifest and review the contingency plans. Lieutenant Chen, a word? After the others had filed out, Rivera closed the door and activated the room's electronic countermeasures, ensuring their conversation would remain private. There are some things about this mission that weren't included in the general briefing, he said seriously. Kozlov isn't just an arms dealer. Intelligence suggests he's also trafficking in human subjects, possibly for chemical weapon testing. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Children? We don't know. What we do know is that several aid workers and journalists who got too close to his operation have disappeared without a trace. If they're being held at the compound, they become part of the extraction, if possible. But, Lieutenant, this is a high-priority target. The chemical weapons represent a clear and present danger to thousands of innocent lives. If forced to choose between saving potential hostages and preventing those weapons from reaching terrorist cells, Sarah met his gaze steadily. I understand the mission parameters, Colonel. Do you? Because your psychological profile suggests a strong protective instinct toward civilians. I need to know you can maintain operational focus even if the situation becomes morally complex. For a long moment, Sarah was quiet. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard experience. In Afghanistan, I once tracked 3 Taliban fighters who'd taken a village schoolteacher hostage. They were using him as bait to draw coalition forces into an ambush that would have killed dozens of our people. What did you do? I completed the mission. The schoolteacher survived, the ambush was neutralized, and the intelligence we gathered led to the destruction of an entire weapons cache that would have supplied insurgents for months. Rivera nodded slowly. How? Sarah's smile was cold and sharp as winter moonlight. I became the Night Angel, Colonel. Tomorrow night, Victor Kozlov will discover what that really means. As they prepared to leave the briefing room, Rivera had one final question. The demonstration with Martinez, was that really just tracking and enhanced senses? Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing something deeper and more mysterious in her dark eyes. There are things they don't teach in any military training program, Colonel. Skills passed down through generations, techniques that blur the line between science and art. The indigenous trackers who trained me called it walking between the worlds, moving through space in ways that conventional understanding can't explain. And you believe that? I believe in results. Tomorrow night, you'll see what the Night Angel can really do. After she left, Rivera stood alone in the briefing room, staring at the satellite images of Kozlov's compound. In 30 years of military service, he'd worked with the best Special Forces operators in the world. But something about Lieutenant Sarah Chen was different, something that went beyond exceptional training or natural talent. Whatever her secrets, he hoped they would be enough. Because if the intelligence reports were accurate, the stakes of Operation Silent Storm couldn't be higher. Chemical weapons in terrorist hands would mean death on an unimaginable scale. He thought about her words. Tomorrow night you'll see what the Night Angel can really do. Despite himself, Rivera found he was looking forward to the demonstration. The helicopter touched down in a mountain clearing 15 kilometers from Victor Kozlov's compound, its rotors whispering through the thin air at 3,000 feet above sea level. Sarah Chen was the first to exit, her movement so fluid that she seemed to pour from the aircraft rather than step down. She wore all-black tactical gear, her face painted with charcoal patterns that made her features blend into shadow. The rest of the team followed more conventionally, laden with assault rifles, communications equipment, and enough explosives to level a small building. In contrast, Sarah carried only a compact sidearm, a tactical knife, and a small pack containing surveillance equipment. Radio check, Ghost whispered into his headset as the helicopter disappeared into the night sky. One by one, the team confirmed their communications were functioning. Sarah's voice came last, barely audible even through the electronic amplification. Night Angel, clear and silent. Colonel Rivera had remained at base command, but his voice crackled through their earpieces. Team leader, you have operational control. Night Angel, you are cleared for reconnaissance. Report every 15 minutes. Martinez, designated as team leader for the field operation, consulted his GPS unit and night vision scope. The compound lay to the north, hidden behind 3 ridge lines of jagged rock and dense pine forest. Night Angel, you're up. We'll establish Overwatch position at Checkpoint Alpha in 4 hours. That gives you 3 hours for your ghost walk. Sarah nodded once and began stripping equipment from her pack. She removed her boots and replaced them with soft-soled climbing shoes that looked more like ballet slippers than military footwear. Her radio went into a special pouch designed to muffle any accidental transmission sounds. Most surprisingly, she pulled out what appeared to be a small wooden flute. "What's that for?" Reaper asked, genuinely curious. "Sound masking?" Sarah replied, testing the flute's tone with a breathy whisper that seemed to mimic wind through the trees. "Birds and small animals create natural noise. Predators learn to filter it out. The trick is becoming part of the background rather than trying to move in complete silence." She secured the flute in a chest holster and began applying additional face paint, working by feel in the darkness. The patterns she created weren't random. They followed principles of light disruption and psychological camouflage that most Western militaries had never formally studied. "Time to go hunting," she murmured, and then she was gone. The team members blinked in surprise, looking around the small clearing as if she might reappear. One moment Sarah had been crouched beside them. The next there was only empty space and the whisper of wind through pine needles. "Did anyone see which direction she went?" Martinez asked quietly. Ghost checked his thermal imaging scope and shook his head. "Nothing. It's like she just evaporated." They settled in to wait, taking turns on watch while the others tried to rest. Time crawled by with agonizing slowness. At the 15-minute mark, their radios remained silent. 20 minutes. 25. Finally, at exactly 30 minutes, Sarah's voice came through their earpieces like a ghost in the static. "Night Angel to team leader. Perimeter reached. Beginning detailed reconnaissance." "Copy that. Status report?" "2 guard towers, rotating searchlights on 40-second intervals. Patrol team of 4 moving counterclockwise around the outer wall. No dogs, but motion sensors every 20 meters. Thermal imaging cameras at all corners." Martinez frowned at the intelligence reports they'd studied earlier. "That's twice as many sensors as we expected." "Confirmed. Kozlov has upgraded security significantly in the past week. Something has made him nervous." Ghost leaned into his radio. "Can you bypass the sensors?" A soft laugh came through the static, more breath than sound. "Already past them. Moving to the inner compound." The next 45 minutes passed in tense silence. Occasionally, they heard brief status updates. "Guard change at the main gate. Kitchen staff departing through service entrance. 3 vehicles in the motor pool, engines warm." Then Sarah's voice came through with sharp urgency. "Team leader, be advised. I've got eyes on the chemical weapons storage. It's not what we thought." "Elaborate." "The weapons aren't stored here. This is a distribution point. I count at least 30 sealed containers being loaded into refrigerated trucks." "They're moving the entire inventory tonight." Martinez swore under his breath. If the chemical weapons left the compound before they could intercept them, tracking them would become nearly impossible. "Can you determine the destination?" "Negative. But I can tell you they're planning to divide the shipment. 3 trucks, different routes. We're looking at multiple terrorist cells receiving concurrent delivery." Colonel Rivera's voice cut through the static from base command. "Night Angel, what's your current position?" "Inside the main building, 2nd floor. I've located what appears to be Kozlov's office and communications center." The team members exchanged amazed looks. She'd penetrated not just the outer perimeter but the building itself, apparently without triggering any alarms. "Be advised," Rivera continued. "Satellite thermal imaging shows increased activity around the compound. Whatever's happening, it's bigger than we anticipated." "Confirmed," Sarah whispered. "I count at least 40 personnel on site, twice our intelligence estimate. Most are armed with military-grade weapons. This isn't just an arms deal. It's a major operations hub." Martinez made a quick decision. "Night Angel, extract immediately. We need to call in additional support." "Negative, team leader. I've found something else." The radio crackled with interference. Then Sarah's voice came through with barely controlled anger. "There are prisoners here, at least 20 individuals locked in basement cells, men, women, and children from multiple nationalities." Rivera's voice was grim. "Night Angel, confirm prisoner status." Several appear to be journalists or aid workers based on their clothing and personal effects. Others look like local civilians. They're being held in conditions that suggest—" She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a coldness that made the team members shiver. "They're being used as test subjects for the chemical weapons." The radio went silent for a long moment. Then Rivera spoke carefully. "Night Angel, you are ordered to extract immediately and return to the team. We'll coordinate with higher command for a full-scale rescue operation." "Sir, with respect, those prisoners don't have time for a full-scale operation. The chemical weapons are moving out in less than 2 hours, and from what I'm seeing, Kozlov plans to eliminate all witnesses before he leaves." "That's not your call to make, Lieutenant." Sarah's response came after a pause that seemed to stretch forever. "Sometimes it is, Colonel." The radio went dead. Martinez tried repeatedly to raise her, but got only static in return. Ghost's thermal imaging showed nothing useful. Too much interference from the building's heating system and electronic equipment. "What do we do?" Reaper asked. Before Martinez could answer, explosions lit up the night sky from the direction of the compound. Not the controlled detonations of military demolitions, but the chaotic flashes of electrical systems overloading and fuel sources igniting. "Jesus Christ," Ghost breathed, watching through his scope as lights began going out across the compound in a systematic pattern. "She's taking down their entire infrastructure." The team grabbed their gear and began moving toward the compound at a fast trot, no longer concerned with stealth. Whatever Sarah was doing, subtlety had clearly been abandoned. As they crested the first ridge, they could see the compound spread out below them. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the courtyard, and figures ran back and forth in apparent confusion. Several of the guard towers stood dark and unmanned. "Look at that," Martinez said, pointing to the main gate. "The electronic locks are dead. She's opened our way in." They covered the remaining distance in 20 minutes, finding the outer perimeter completely undefended. The motion sensors hung dark and useless, their control systems apparently fried. The main gate stood wide open, its heavy steel barriers somehow disabled without any sign of explosive damage. "How did she do all this?" Reaper asked in amazement. "Later," Martinez replied grimly. "Right now we've got prisoners to extract and a chemical weapons shipment to stop." They moved into the compound with weapons ready but encountered no resistance. The few guards they glimpsed were running toward the main building, where more explosions continued to light up the night sky. "There," Ghost pointed toward the basement-level windows. "I can see movement down there. Looks like civilians." The team split up. Martinez and Ghost moved to secure the prisoners, while Reaper headed for the motor pool to disable the trucks carrying the chemical weapons. Sarah's voice suddenly crackled through their radios, startling them all. "Team leader, prisoners are secured and moving to the south exit. Recommend you clear the area immediately." "What's your status, Night Angel?" "Currently discussing career opportunities with Mr. Kozlov." Even through the radio static, they could hear something unsettling in her voice, a quality that reminded Martinez of a predator playing with its prey. Ghost's voice came through as he reached the basement level. "Holy shit, guys. These people are in bad shape. Looks like they've been systematically poisoned and treated with experimental antidotes. This is full-scale human experimentation." Martinez felt his jaw clench. He'd seen the aftermath of chemical attacks in Syria and Kurdistan. The idea of deliberately inflicting that suffering on innocent people for testing purposes made his blood run cold. Reaper checked in from the motor pool. "Trucks are secure. Chemical weapons containers appear intact, but they're labeled in Russian and Arabic. This stuff was definitely heading for terrorist cells." "How much?" "Enough to kill half of Europe if properly dispersed. Maybe more." Sarah's voice cut through their communications with deadly calm. "Team leader, be advised that Mr. Kozlov has been very cooperative in explaining his distribution network. I now have the names and locations of 17 terrorist cells across 4 continents who were expecting delivery. Night Angel, what exactly is your position? Kozlov's office, having a private conversation about the ethics of human experimentation. Martinez could hear sounds in the background of her transmission. Not conversation, but something that made him deeply uncomfortable. Night Angel, confirm your status. Kozlov is reconsidering his career choices. Unfortunately, he seems to have had an accident. The building's main lights suddenly went out completely, plunging the compound into near-total darkness. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows. Ghost's voice came through urgently. Prisoners are clear and moving to the extraction point. But guys, some of these people aren't going to make it without immediate medical attention. Medevac is standing by, Rivera's voice crackled from base command. ETA 15 minutes. Martinez coordinated the prisoner evacuation, while Reaper worked to secure the chemical weapons for disposal by specialized teams. Through it all, Sarah remained silent on the radio. It wasn't until the prisoners were loaded onto evacuation helicopters that she finally appeared at the extraction point. She emerged from the shadows so suddenly that Martinez nearly shot her, his finger already tightening on the trigger before his brain recognized the familiar silhouette. Jesus, Night Angel. A little warning next time? Sarah's face was impossible to read in the darkness, but her voice carried a flat, emotionless quality that hadn't been there before. Kozlov won't be trafficking weapons or testing chemicals on prisoners anymore. Is he dead? He's no longer a threat to anyone. Martinez decided not to press for details. Sometimes in their line of work, there were things that were better left unspecified. As they boarded the final extraction helicopter, Reaper asked the question they were all thinking. How did you take down an entire compound security system single-handed? Sarah was quiet for so long that Martinez thought she wasn't going to answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotors. Every electronic system has vulnerabilities if you know where to look. Kozlov's people were good, but they were thinking like engineers, not like someone who's spent years learning to find the invisible spaces between things. That still doesn't explain how you got past thermal imaging and motion sensors. Sarah looked out the helicopter window at the burning compound shrinking below them. There are ways of moving that aren't taught in any military manual. Techniques for controlling body temperature, heartbeat, even brainwave patterns. The indigenous trackers who trained me called it becoming one with the shadow. Modern technology is sophisticated, but it still depends on baseline assumptions about human behavior and physiology. Ghost leaned forward, genuinely curious. You're talking about meditation techniques? Like martial arts mysticism? I'm talking about skills that have been developed over thousands of years by people who needed to hunt and survive in environments where the slightest mistake meant death. Western science is just beginning to understand what the human body and mind are truly capable of when pushed beyond normal limits. Martinez thought about the demonstration she'd given with the building search, and now tonight's impossible infiltration. The Night Angel thing, it's not just a call sign, is it? Sarah met his eyes, and for a moment he saw something ancient and predatory looking back at him. Some names choose you, Sergeant. They become part of who you are until the line between the person and the legend starts to blur. As the helicopter carried them back to base, Martinez found himself wondering exactly what they'd just witnessed. The mission had been a complete success. Prisoners rescued, chemical weapons secured, terrorist distribution network exposed. But something about Sarah's methods left him with more questions than answers. He thought about Kozlov's compound, now a smoldering ruin behind them, and about the arms dealer who would never threaten innocent lives again. Whatever Sarah had done in that office, it had been swift and final. Looking at her now, sitting calmly in the helicopter's jump seat, she appeared to be nothing more than a highly trained soldier completing a successful mission. But Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just seen something that existed outside the normal boundaries of military operations. The Night Angel wasn't just Sarah Chen's call sign, it was something deeper, older, and far more dangerous than any of them had realized. The debriefing room at the secure military facility buzzed with activity as intelligence analysts pored over the documents and digital storage devices Sarah had extracted from Kozlov's compound. Colonel Rivera sat at the head of the conference table, his weathered face grim as he reviewed preliminary reports from the rescued prisoners' medical examinations. 17 different terrorist cells across 4 continents, he announced to the assembled team. Thanks to the intelligence gathered during Operation Silent Storm, we've already coordinated with international partners to roll up 3 major networks. The chemical weapons have been secured and will be destroyed by specialized disposal teams. Martinez, Ghost, and Reaper sat around the table looking exhausted but satisfied. The mission had been a complete success by any military standard, but their eyes kept drifting to the empty chair where Sarah should have been sitting. "Where is Lieutenant Chen?" Rivera asked, noticing their glances. "Still in medical," Ghost replied. "The docs wanted to run some tests after they found chemical residue on her gear. Apparently she was exposed to trace amounts of the weapons during the infiltration." Rivera frowned. "Is she compromised?" "That's what's weird," Martinez said. "The medical team says her blood work is completely normal. No signs of chemical exposure, no elevated toxicity markers. It's like the stuff just didn't affect her." Before Rivera could respond, the door opened and Sarah entered. She'd changed from her tactical gear into standard fatigues, but something about her presence still made the room feel smaller and more dangerous. She moved to her seat with that characteristic fluid motion that never seemed quite natural. "Lieutenant Chen," Rivera began formally, "the medical team has cleared you for duty?" "Yes, sir. No adverse effects from chemical exposure." "How is that possible? The substances found on your equipment were highly toxic nerve agents." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her dark eyes held a flicker of something that might have been amusement. "I've built up certain resistances over the years, Colonel. Part of the unconventional training I mentioned." Rivera opened a thick folder in front of him. "Let's discuss that training, shall we? I've been reviewing your complete service record, not just the standard file, but the classified annexes. 3 years with indigenous tracking specialists, 6 months in Tokyo learning urban stealth techniques, 2 years studying with survivalists in Alaska and Montana. But there are gaps, periods where your whereabouts aren't documented. Some training programs prefer to maintain operational security, sir." "Training programs? Or something else entirely?" The room fell silent. Martinez could sense undercurrents in the conversation that went beyond standard military debriefing protocols. Rivera consulted his notes. Victor Kozlov's body was found in his office with injuries consistent with close-quarters combat. No gunshot wounds, no knife marks. The official cause of death is listed as cardiac arrest brought on by extreme stress. Men in his line of work live dangerous lives, Colonel. The interesting thing is the expression on his face. The medical examiner described it as absolute terror. Whatever he saw in his final moments, it scared him to death, literally. Sarah said nothing, but Martinez noticed her hands resting calmly on the table, steady as stone. Rivera leaned back in his chair. "I've been in this business for 30 years, Lieutenant. I've worked with every type of Special Forces operator the military produces. Rangers, SEALs, Delta Force, Green Berets. But I've never seen anyone do what you did last night. I completed the mission within acceptable parameters, sir. You infiltrated a heavily fortified compound, disabled their entire security network, rescued 20 prisoners, and eliminated a high-value target without backup or heavy weapons. That's not within normal parameters for any human operator." Ghost cleared his throat. "Colonel, with respect, does it matter? The mission was a success. Innocent lives were saved, chemical weapons were secured, and a major terrorist threat was neutralized." Rivera's eyes remained fixed on Sarah. It matters because I need to understand what I'm deploying. Every weapon system has specifications, capabilities, and limitations. If Lieutenant Chen is operating beyond normal human parameters, I need to know what those parameters are. For the first time since entering the room, Sarah smiled. It was a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. What would you like to know, Colonel? Let's start with how you bypassed thermal imaging systems designed to detect human body heat. Tibetan monks have practiced heat regulation techniques for over 1,000 years. With proper training, you can control blood flow, core temperature, and even heartbeat to remarkable degrees. The thermal cameras were calibrated for standard human signatures. And the motion sensors? Speed and rhythm. Most people move with predictable patterns, heel-toe walking, regular breathing, consistent momentum. The sensors filter out environmental motion like swaying branches or small animals. Move slowly enough, with the right rhythm, and you become part of the background noise. Martinez leaned forward, fascinated despite himself. What about the guards? How did you get past trained professionals without them seeing or hearing you? Sarah's expression grew more serious. Human perception is limited by expectation and biology. Guards watch for threats that fit known patterns. People moving like people, making sounds like people would make. But if you move like water flowing around obstacles, if you breathe like wind through leaves, if you become something other than what they're looking for. You're talking about psychological camouflage, Ghost said slowly. I'm talking about becoming invisible by being impossible to categorize as a threat. It's an old technique, used by hunters and warriors for millennia before modern technology made us forget what human senses are truly capable of. Rivera consulted his folder again. The documents you extracted from Kozlov's office included communications in 7 different languages: Russian, Arabic, Mandarin, Farsi, German, Spanish, and what our linguists think might be a Kurdish dialect. You translated them all. Language is just pattern recognition. If you understand the underlying structures, picking up new languages becomes increasingly simple. In the field, under combat conditions, Sarah's smile turned predatory. Fear and adrenaline actually enhance pattern recognition, if you know how to channel them properly. Reaper had been quiet throughout the exchange, but now he spoke up. Night Angel, I've got to ask. What happened to Kozlov? Really? Sarah met his gaze steadily. He was a man who profited from the torture and murder of innocent people. Children were dying in those basement cells because he wanted to test the effectiveness of his chemical weapons. When I showed him exactly what kind of person that made him, his heart couldn't handle the revelation. You scared him to death? I showed him the truth about himself. Some people can't survive that level of self-awareness. Rivera closed the folder with a sharp snap. Lieutenant, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Are you entirely human? The question hung in the air like smoke. Martinez felt his pulse quicken as he waited for Sarah's response. She was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes distant as if she were looking at something beyond the room's walls. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a strange quality that seemed to echo slightly despite the room's acoustic dampening. I am exactly as human as I choose to be, Colonel. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. There are things in this world that exist in the spaces between what we think we know and what we're willing to accept. I am one of those things. Rivera studied her for several seconds, then made a decision. Fair enough. As long as you continue to serve with honor and complete your mission successfully, your methods are your own concern. Thank you, sir. However, there is one more matter to discuss. The prisoners you rescued have been asking about you. Specifically, they want to thank the person who saved them. Sarah's expression shifted, showing the first genuine emotion she'd displayed since entering the room. That's not necessary. Actually, it is. These people have been through hell. Allowing them to express gratitude is part of their psychological recovery process. 30 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the medical ward's recovery section, surrounded by the 23 individuals she'd extracted from Kozlov's compound. They represented a cross-section of humanity: aid workers, journalists, local civilians who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. All showed signs of chemical exposure and systematic abuse. But their eyes held something Sarah hadn't expected to see: hope. An older woman who'd introduced herself as Dr. Elena Vasquez, a relief worker who'd been captured while trying to establish a field hospital, approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "I don't know what you did in that place," she said in accented English, "but I heard the guards screaming. For the first time in months, they were afraid, instead of us." A young man who'd been working as a freelance journalist nodded emphatically. "The guards called you demon and shadow walker. They said you moved through walls and appeared in places where no person could be." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the gratitude and attention, but she understood Rivera's point about their need to express it. "I'm just glad you're all safe." "Safe because of you," Dr. Vasquez insisted. "We would have died in those cells if you hadn't come for us." As Sarah listened to their stories, she began to understand the full scope of what Kozlov had been doing. The chemical weapons testing had been systematic and brutal, designed to perfect delivery methods and antidotes. The prisoners had been guinea pigs in the most literal sense. When she finally returned to the debriefing room, she found her team still there, going over mission reports and equipment inventories. "How'd it go?" Martinez asked. "Difficult but necessary," Sarah replied, taking her seat. Ghost looked up from his tablet. "Night Angel. I've been thinking about everything that happened. The skills you demonstrated, the way you move, the things you can do. Where did all that really come from?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Have any of you ever pushed yourselves beyond what you thought was humanly possible? In combat, during training, in moments when failure meant death?" All three men nodded. "In those moments, did you ever feel like you became something more than just a regular person? Like you tapped into abilities you didn't know you had?" "Yeah," Reaper said slowly. "Sometimes in demolitions work, I get into a zone where I can feel the shape of an explosion before I set it. Like I'm thinking with the explosives instead of just using them." Martinez nodded. "In firefights, sometimes time seems to slow down. I can see enemy movements before they happen, react to things I shouldn't be able to perceive." "And you, Ghost?" The communications specialist thought for a moment. "Electronic systems sometimes seem to talk to me. I can troubleshoot problems by intuition, like I'm having a conversation with the hardware." Sarah smiled, and for the first time it was genuine and warm. "That's where my abilities come from. The same place yours do. The difference is that I've learned to access that state consciously, to live in those spaces between normal human limitations and what we're truly capable of becoming." "So you're not—" Martinez hesitated. "Not what? Supernatural? Inhuman? Genetically modified?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm a human being who's learned to use more of what humans already possess. The indigenous peoples who trained me understood that the boundaries we accept as absolute are often just limitations we've imposed on ourselves." Rivera, who'd been listening from the doorway, entered the room. "Whatever the source of your abilities, Lieutenant, you've proven your value to this team and to the mission. The intelligence you gathered has already resulted in 12 arrests and the prevention of at least 3 planned terrorist attacks." "Just doing my job." "Sir, no, you went well beyond your job, which brings me to my final point." Rivera placed a small velvet box on the table in front of Sarah. "By order of the Joint Chiefs, you're being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations involving conflict with an armed enemy." Sarah stared at the box without opening it. That's not necessary. It's already done. You've also been promoted to captain and assigned as the permanent leader of a new specialized reconnaissance unit. I work better alone. Not anymore. The success of Operation Silent Storm has convinced Command that we need more operators with your skill set. You'll be training and leading them. For the first time since Martinez had met her, Sarah looked genuinely surprised. You want me to teach others to do what I do? As much as possible, yes. Sarah opened the velvet box and stared at the metal inside. Some things can't be taught, Colonel. They have to be discovered. Then help them discover it. She closed the box and met Rivera's eyes. I'll need complete autonomy in selecting candidates and training methods. Granted. And operational control in the field. No interference from command unless specifically requested. Also granted. Sarah stood and tucked the metal box into her pocket. Then I accept. As she moved toward the door, Martinez called out. Captain Chen? She turned back. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're on our side. Sarah's smile was mysterious and dangerous, like moonlight on a blade's edge. So are a lot of people who will never know I exist. After she left, the three men sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, Ghost spoke up. So what do we think? Is she human or something else? Martinez considered the question seriously. I think she's what humans were meant to become before we forgot what we were capable of. That's either really inspiring or really terrifying, Reaper observed. Why can't it be both? 6 months later, Captain Sarah Night Angel Chen stood in a remote training facility in the mountains of Colorado, watching as her first class of recruits attempted to move silently through a forest filled with electronic sensors and thermal imaging equipment. Half of them were already trapped by the detection systems, their positions marked by red laser dots. But 3 were still moving, having learned to control their breathing, regulate their body temperature, and move with the fluid grace that made them nearly invisible to both human observers and electronic surveillance. She smiled in the darkness, remembering her first conversation with Martinez and the skepticism in his voice when he'd questioned her call sign. The Night Angel wasn't just a name anymore. It was becoming a new type of warrior, adapted for a world where the old rules of engagement no longer applied. And Sarah Chen was creating an entire generation of shadows who would protect the innocent and hunt the guilty in ways their enemies would never see coming. In the distance, an owl called through the night. Sarah called back, perfectly mimicking its hunting cry. The night had always been her domain. Now she was teaching others to claim it as their own.